next speaker this morning. We have a presentation on communicating about prescribed fire by Ludie Bond. And Ludie is a wildfire mitigation specialist with the Florida Forest Service. So 1 second as we trade out and Ludie pulls up her slides.
This morning I'm going to present on talking to the public and media about prescribed fire. That's not always in everybody's comfort zone, but it's something that as prescribed burning professionals, whether you're a private landowner or you work for an agency, it's something that needs to be an integral part of your prescribed burning plan and your prescribed burning practice. So just basically the key to a successful prescribed fire program, it's building trust, establishing credibility, and communicating fire issues with the public. So your publics can be anything from those who live in and near and around the areas you may be burning. It could be political figures, it could be the media. So you need to find out who your publics are specifically for in near and around the areas that you're managing. So here's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about some tactics to respond to those questions and complaints about smoke. That seems to be one of the hot topics. No pun, well, I guess pun is intended. Techniques and tips for responding to media questions. And then I'm going to give you a couple of examples of talking about prescribed fire in front of the camera and during some difficult situations. So just to kind of set the stage here, I'm not really telling you all anything you don't necessarily know, but just reminding you that Florida leads the nation in the use of prescribed burning. We're pretty proud of that. We burn approximately 2.5 million acres annually. Want to remind you all, and this is pretty key for today's presentation, that your audiences, those residents, they're voters, and public opinion, or a lot of them maybe, public opinion is the primary driving force in forming public policy. So we're fortunate here in the Southeast that many of our states have policies in place that allow us to do what we do in practicing prescribed burning. So let's remember that those people impacted by our burns can certainly influence that public policy. And then the public concerns that seem to be the top 3 that need to be addressed in your messaging. Many people are truly fearful of fire, whether it's wildfire or prescribed fire. Smoke, we know that it's always a concern, both for us and for our audiences. It can be inconvenient, health concerns, smoke on the roadways, and then a concern for wildlife. So any communications plan needs to have some of these key elements in them. So just to remind you all what those need to be, identify your audiences. Find out what it is that's important to them and address that in your communications plans. Know what your key messages are going to be. And then I've listed a lot of different ways that you can actually get communications out to people. It used to be traditionally television, newspaper, and radio, but as you can see from the list here, we have a lot of various platforms that are available for us to use, from email groups, phone trees, various social media platforms, face-to-face. That is the most effective and impactful way to communicate with people. But as we know, in the last year and change, that hasn't always been the appropriate way to communicate with folks with COVID in mind. You want to find out if your messages have been received as they were intended. And then as a result, have you changed opinion and possibly changed behavior? So researcher by the name of Schindler put a quote here from them. You know, we deal with urban and rural audiences. And so his research showed that urban residents, generally their interest is in protecting recreational areas and wildlife, whereas your urban residents typically are more concerned with protecting landscapes, native species, and getting rid of invasives. So it's interesting to keep that in mind, that based on where your audiences are, your publics are, they may have different things that are important to them and that they're concerned about. So I'm actually going to read through, it's kind of laborious, but I'm going to read through this quote here. I think it's pretty important, and I'm going to set the stage a little bit more for the rest of the presentation. With more and more people than ever living in the vicinity of the wildland-urban interface, communicating wildfire management activities and building trust with the public is paramount for safety. Although the time and resources it takes to build and maintain the public's trust may seem daunting, it may be one of the most important factors in determining the long-term viability of your fire management program. Trust, again, there's that word, is built over time through personal relationships with citizens and communities, and by demonstrating competency and establishing credibility. When trust and confidence have been established, managers can enjoy strong support of fire and fuels management programs, even in some of the most challenging communities. So I read that because, as you see, I've highlighted some key words there: trust, confidence. You want support from your various audiences in your prescribed fire program. So in order to achieve that support, you need to build trust. Some more researchers here in Gainesville at the University of Florida, Doctors Monroe and Nelson, just highlighted a couple of things here. Communicating with people in the interface, figure out what they care about, learn what's missing from what they know, find out what they already know and what's missing. You need to figure out all the reasons that people might be motivated to support your agency's actions, and use all of those reasons in a range of different messaging. And also their research found that stressing forest health and wildlife habitat over reduced risk may be more impactful. People aren't always scared of fire unless they've experienced a wildfire recently. But if we're stressing forest health and wildlife habitat, that seems to have a greater impact on them. So many of you all, if you're in prescribed fire in Florida in the Southeast, you know Steve Torch Miller. So I'm going to kind of use him and one of his programs as an example of a very successful prescribed burn program here in North Central Florida. So Steve is currently, many of you know, the director, fire and aviation up there in Region 9, but he used to be with St. Johns River Water Management District, where he oversaw over 600,000 acres with his land management practices. So with the example I'm going to provide to you all today, well, first, let me give you this quote, McDaniel, another researcher, because I think Steve Miller's program has been used in a lot of research publications, but it talks here about how they used Water Management District, used every possible medium to determine their message and inform the public. So they use websites, sign postings on the boundaries, kiosks, keeping the neighbors informed on burn days. But one of the other things that they did in that last paragraph there, it involves staffing and providing resources for the burn to ensure that firefighters were visible on all sides of and sections of the fire. Well, we don't all have capacity all the time to make sure that we have enough staff so that they're visible all the time, but it certainly proved to be a very valuable use of their time and effort when doing prescribed burns at Julington-Durbin Creek Preserve. So here's a little bit of information on that location where they were managing that for fire. Now, Julington-Durbin, when Water Management District took over that land, I think it had not had much fire introduced into that area for a while. So it took starting that prescribed burn plan and developing it over time, not just with the prescribed burning part of it, but with the education and communications with the local residents. So you can see here a highly visible area, Interstate 95, multi-use property. They got wetlands, wildlife and wildflowers, historical and cultural resources, a lot of things going on with this piece of property. So not a very, somewhat of a challenging, let me put it this way, somewhat of a challenging location to conduct prescribed burning. So here's a map of the Julington-Durbin Preserve. And you can see there over to the right on the east side of the map, there's Interstate 95 right there. So smoke management certainly would be very tricky here. And then here's a picture of the Julington-Durbin, one of the boundaries there next to some of the townhomes. So very close. You're definitely going to impact the people who live here with smoke, ash, seeing the fire. And this is before fire was introduced to it. So you can kind of give you a visual of what's going on here. But I'll tell you, over time, and with all the various efforts and communications that Steve and his personnel were involved with, now when they're doing these prescribed burns in these areas, they've built up such a positive relationship with these folks living in these condos that they come out and have barbecues, they have happy hours, they're out with the blenders. I'm not embellishing. This is what they do. And when they haven't seen fire in a while, they're kind of waiting for the next prescribed burns to come through. Water management will actually get phone calls and or emails from these residents wanting to know when the next burn is going to be, because they've enjoyed seeing over time how things have changed in this burn block, from the wildflowers and pollinators, more turkey, et cetera. They've certainly realized the benefits of the prescribed burn program there. So again, another quote from researcher McDaniels, they learned that building that public trust is crucial to the effectiveness of their fire program. They built that relationship over time. It was consistent. They listened to their audiences. So this is not something, I guess my point with all of this example is, this isn't something that you just communicate the week before, day before, or morning of. This is something that is relationships that you're building with the neighborhoods and communities in and around the areas that you're managing. And it takes time, but the investment of your time, you certainly will reap the benefits. I'm hoping that this is going to come through. If not, we'll move on. Oh, here we go. So I recently this past year, I did an interview with WFT News here in Gainesville on prescribed burning in Noonan's Lake State Forest here in.
One of the main goals of the Florida Forest Service, one of our main objectives, is to protect the peoples of Florida from the damaging impacts of wildfire. One of the ways to do that is to reduce the hazardous fuel loads. So we can use methods such as mowing, chopping, herbicide use, but really prescribed burning is the most effective and economical way to reduce hazardous fuel loads. So that's one of the main schools of benefit, is reducing the potential negative impacts of wildfire to the communities and people of the state of Florida. The other main use would be to improve ecosystems, habitats, to improve forage for the wildlife in the area, to improve or create or reestablish the appropriate habitats for endangered and protected species that have to have fire in their ecosystem, in their habitat to exist. There's multiple objectives to how we manage our land: recreation, hunting, camping, hiking, birding, bicycling, and opening up scenic areas, increasing the bird, butterfly, pollinator populations, as well as other wildlife. And we do that, again, as I mentioned, in conjunction with Florida Fish Wildlife Conservation Commission. All right, guys, enjoy.
So I give you that example to show you that when you're providing information, and that was kind of a casual kind of interview, it was very kind of conversational. But this quote here from Sarah McCaffrey, who is a researcher with the U.S. Forest Service out in Fort Collins, Colorado, providing clear information formatted in a way that people want to receive it. They're much more likely to understand it. If you don't make the effort to reach the people, you can't expect them to understand. Credibility, competency, that's something that Dr. McCaffrey emphasizes in her research, and that is something that we also heard from Steve Miller. Another bit of research has proven that public tolerance of smoke from prescribed burning increases when people realize the benefits for healthier forests. So again, that's talking about emphasizing that in your messaging as well, is how important it is for forest health. So now I'm going to move into talking about a few myths that some of the general public may have that we need to focus on with our messaging. Thinking that all fires are bad. You can always go back to talking about how the indigenous peoples in Florida, some of the early settlers, as the cattle drives went across Florida with our Cracker Cowboys, fire has always been a part of the Southeast and here in Florida. So we want to focus on, this is not something new. This is something that our flora and fauna are dependent on. And then we also have the luxury here in the Southeast of having regeneration very quickly after any type of fire moves through our forested areas. So you can always focus on that positive aspect, that nature is resilient and it does come back after just a heavy dew or a light rain. Doesn't take long for us to get regen here in the Southeast. Another myth is that fires burn the animals. Well, here's an example of some various fire-dependent species that many of you have on the lands that you manage. So focusing on and mentioning those animals, sometimes that's very positive messaging that resonates with some of your audiences that can be very important. The wildflowers, pollinators, people don't always think about that as being a benefit of prescribed burning. Your gopher tortoise populations, so you can always message on endangered and protected species. And then you can message on the benefits to ground browsing animals for their forage, such as bobwhite quail, turkey, and providing that information to people. And again, that's the positive side that people will see after the burns. So a third myth, and this is going to kind of lead me into another example of a very difficult prescribed burning situation that I encountered within the last couple of years. But sometimes our audiences will say, well, you shouldn't be burning on windy days and dry conditions because, about that time, the Florida Forest Service may not be issuing outdoor burn authorizations for anyone who's not a certified burner. We may or may not. But those windy and dry conditions are sometimes things that we need to help get fire pushed through certain blocks. But then that's kind of a mixed message if we're also putting out information telling people not to burn on windy days and use caution during dry, windy conditions. So using these message points to explain why the U.S. Forest Service or Fish and Wildlife or Water Management or Florida Forest Service or whoever may be burning on those days with those kind of weather conditions, because that's exactly what we need in our prescription for that day. So here's the example I'd like to share with you all about a very difficult prescribed burn situation that could happen to any of you here on the call. Goethe State Forest in Levy County. About a little over a year ago, we were doing 2 days of burning 7,000 acres. The first day, we were going to burn about 4,500 acres. You can see what the weather was that day. Now, if our max temp was 51, we started the day obviously much, much colder than that. And that played into what happened later that day. But you can see dispersion, wind direction, wind speed, air quality index, everything was looking real good. So we moved ahead with this burn, and here's what our pilot saw from the air. Brian mentioned dispersion. Well, there we go. We had some dispersion. We had some mixing height action going on there, transport winds. We were doing aerial ignition, and from all accounts, everything was looking great. So now I'm going to play you the clip of what happened. See if we can get this. There we go.
And not only is it freezing out, but if you left your comfy couch, you probably saw and smelled that smoke that blew across the Bay Area tonight. That burning campfire smell made a lot of your eyes water out there. It came from a 3,800 acre burn, a controlled burn in Levy County. Bobby is back with us tonight. You could smell it when you walked outside of our studios here on Guinea Boulevard. I know a lot of people were talking about having breathing issues and obviously itchy eyes as well from that smoke.
Hernando and Pasco had it late afternoon, and then right around 4:30, 5:30, 6 o'clock, it rolled into Tampa, and it was thick when it rolled in. Let me show you what it is. It's from a controlled burn in Levy County, which is over 75 miles from downtown Tampa. So it's a long way, but that air, obviously you felt the winds out there today. It's blowing in from the north, so it's blowing in this direction. And it's colder air, so that air is actually sinking as it comes southward, keeping that smoke trapped to the ground. You can see it here on the satellite radar. Watch the darker colors here. There, white first, and then it gets darker. That's the actual smoke. Watch the green that pops up here. We can see the smoke particles on the radar. from earlier this afternoon, especially when it really started to get thick. That was around 1 to 2 o'clock this afternoon. Now, if I go back down, you can see it extending all the way down. Now, we kind of lose it on the satellite right in this area, but this is what we saw late this afternoon push down into the Tampa area. Now, it has cleared up quite a bit tonight, but there is still a chance that we get some, and if it flares back up for tomorrow, again, this is a controlled burn. If it does flare back up tomorrow, we'll be looking at wind directions in the same direction, so that could put some more smoke here. I think we've seen the worst of it, but if you do see it tomorrow, remember, kids and older adults and those with any kind of breathing issues, asthma, even lung disease, heart disease, that's when you really want to be careful and you want to stay indoors if you see it.
So this was another one of the headlines, Fox 13 Tampa Bay. It was kind of unbelievable to think that smoke from our fire in Levy County was in downtown Tampa, but here's your radar that the National Weather Service put out in Tampa Bay. And yeah, we were the point of origin. Now, when you see, here's where the point of origin is for that smoke. And as it came through, it went through Citrus County and Hernando and all the way down to Hillsborough. Yeah, chances are it picked up smoke from other burns as well. I mean, other agencies, other private landowners were burning that day. It was a great day to burn in Florida, but smoke doesn't have DNA. So when you take a look at where the smoke started, the focus was on Levy County, and here's what it looked like in downtown Tampa. So of course, my phone was blowing up as the information officer on the burn. Multiple social media outlets from multiple agencies all around had information going out as far as, the smoke and what the cause was. But you notice some of the words, we've got haze, odor, some things that might not be they're kind of negative in connotation. So some of those things came out, and that was making it a little difficult with our messaging. But here's what I heard from the phone calls I received and from some social media analytics I did after the fact. On this particular burn, the public who I spoke to, they tended to understand the need and the benefits for prescribed burning. They got our basic messaging that we typically use year in and year out. But here's what they wanted to know. Why were we burning when there were red flag conditions in Florida? Why burn so much acreage at one time? Why when it's so windy? Why did we have to put smoke and ash in their area? Why do we have to burn when the weather's so beautiful and now they can't get outside and enjoy it? Why do we burn so much in the winter months? Why didn't we burn the week before when the weather was warmer and cloudier? Why couldn't we burn and put all the smoke over the Gulf of Mexico? So I was getting these kind of questions, which to me said they needed deeper answers, because our audiences these days can go and get information on prescribed burning by Googling things up. They've got instant information at their fingertips. So people were calling me saying they were master naturalists or members of the Sierra Club and things that they already knew about prescribed burning. So they already knew these messages. This is our standard messaging that we use fairly regularly. And I'm not saying we need to change any of this. We need to still focus on the basics here, reducing hazardous fuel loads, increasing safety for our wildland firefighters and the public. What do the animals do? Well, they adapt. They are adapted to fire, fly away, move, burrow underground, etc. We tell people to pay attention to news coverage, stay indoors if they have respiratory problems, use caution on the roadways. So those are our typical messages, and I think our audiences get that. I'm going to suggest that moving forward, we need to expand our messaging. People are giving us deeper questions that require answers with more research and science behind them. So let's talk about why we need dry and windy conditions to push fire through some of our understory areas and vegetation types. Talk about how smoke from prescribed burns is different than from wildfires, shorter duration, emits less particles, those kind of messaging. Burning a large number of acreages at one time will reduce the impacts to roads and areas compared to burning several smaller areas over several days and weeks. So there's an upside to burning more acreage at one time. And then talk about the weather conditions we have in the winter, the clear, cool, sunny days weather conditions with the higher indices, transport winds carrying the smoke to other areas. You know, the day we had our burn in Levy County on Goethe State Forest, it dumped it in downtown Tampa, which is not typical, but we can talk about how weather impacts smoke, how we, in the winter months, typically have consistent wind direction versus spring months where it's erratic. So that's going to help us with our smoke management. We typically have the lower dispersion indices when it's warmer and cloudier. Smoke management is an integral part of our burn plans, and talk about how, you know, we pay very close attention to wind direction, gusts, changes in the winds, etc. So here's the take-home messages that I would give for you all today, that there is much more to achieving a successful prescribed burn program than just putting fire on the ground and doing complete mop up. That's somewhat the easy part, maybe not the mop up. But as research has shown, it's critical to communicate with your audiences. Take the time and effort to put in the work, trust the process, educate your audiences, find out what they need to know, find out how is the best way to communicate with them. And then, you know, you're wanting to meet the needs of your audiences, answer their questions and concerns. And then I've listed here some of the typical ways that we can use for multi-messaging platforms. The homeowner association meetings, that kind of goes along with the face-to-face, great way to communicate with people. And use your partner agencies too. We all support each other. We're all, you know, anybody who lights a drip torch and puts fire on the ground, we're all in this together. So we can certainly support and assist each other with our messaging to make sure we have consistent messaging throughout the state of Florida and here in the Southeast. So here is my contact information. And I guess, Mary, if you can put that, also put that in the chat. And then I'll open it up for questions.
All right, Ludie, well, thank you so much for your presentation. We appreciate it. Enjoyed the videos. Glad those were able to work. We have about 5 minutes remaining in this section on our program this morning. So if you have questions for Ludie, please go ahead and type those into the Q&A tool in Zoom, and we will try and get to those. We've also, Mary Nell's been putting links in the chat window. So there's a list of some smoke modeling tools so that you don't end up as a case study in one of Ludie's future presentations. So you can look and check some of those out. There's also Ludie's contact information in the chat window, so you can reach out to her if you have questions. So let's go ahead and check and see if we have questions coming into the Q&A tool in Zoom. All right, here's a question that just came in from Richard. Thanks, Richard. Richard asked, did you go forward with day 2 of the burn? So what happened next?
Yeah, we did. We moved forward. There was no reason not to conduct the burn. I think if we had what is it called, the wind split, is that what we should have looked at? I mean, we had no idea that the smoke was going to lift and go and travel 76 miles and dump, but the colder temperatures, you know, certainly did that. So I think, or is it called a high split? High split. Yep. There you go. So that was, I think, the modeling that was kind of our lesson learned at the after action with that is, wow, how do we go forward and not let this happen again? So, but it was very interesting to me as a public information officer, getting those kinds of questions from various audiences that were much deeper than the typical question of like, where do the bunnies go? It was nothing like that. It was, why are you burning on red flag conditions? And why are you putting ash, you know, way down here in Tampa, all the way from Levy? Why couldn't you put it over the Gulf of Mexico? That to me said, okay, now I think our messaging needs to shift focus a little more, not getting away from the basics. As I mentioned, I listed all those message points there, but giving people research and science-based. You know, we learn as communicators that one of the best ways to form our messaging is, I think it's a 7th grade level, maybe, talk to people have your messaging be at that level. I don't think so. I don't think so anymore. And the reason I say that is because people have tools at their disposal to, as I mentioned, Google things up and find out from the internet or from their cell phone a lot more information. I had a lady call me from Lutz wanting to know why we were putting ash in her backyard. And I said, no, that can't be coming from our fire. And she said, oh no, I contacted the sheriff's office in Hillsborough County and they said it's your fire. So people are resourceful. They know where to go and where to get their information. And I'll tell you, the social media analytics were very interesting, that when our messaging for our prescribed burns was shared and we tagged our county sheriff's office and they shared our messaging, they had the largest reach and the largest impact, and the majority of the conversations that were happening with agencies, everybody went to the sheriff's office for their information. Now the sheriff's office then redirected them back to us, to our page and our contact information. But I would suggest that you all partner with agencies such as emergency management, county fire rescue, sheriff's office, and get them to push your messaging out, because you're going to have a much larger ripple effect.
All right, Ludie, well, thank you so much. At this point, I don't see any more questions in. You got a lot of nice feedback in the chat window there for your presentation today. Oh, we have one more question that just came in from Donald. And interesting, Donald says, you know, if this had been a private sector burn, do you think it would have been shut down?
Good point. Good point, Don. Because yeah, if we get smoke complaints, is the Florida Forest Service, a lot of times, you know, we look into that and see if that's something that we need to shut that burn down and put some restrictions on that burner, or require an air curtain incinerator if it's a pile burn. If you're meeting the prescription, I would think not. I would think the Florida Forest Service wouldn't look into shutting you down. I think a lot of the land that you manage, I believe, is up in the Perry district, so I can't really speak on behalf of a different district, but I would say generally no. If you're in prescription, I think you'd be able to move forward with that. But I gave everybody that example to say this could happen to anybody. It happened to the Florida Forest Service, but the same day, Water Management put some smoke in downtown Orlando, not to the impact that we did, but Water Management had a piece of that day as well. So it can happen to anybody. And thank you so much for your time, and I'll be able to stay later for questions.
All right, well, thank you so much for your presentation this morning, Ludie.